Today's reading is Mark chapter 5, verses 24 to 34. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." The word of the Lord. Thanks.
You could say that on one hand, we've never been more connected. And yet, at the very same time, I think it's fair to say that for many of us, we've never felt so alone. And that's not just a feeling, that's actually a crisis. It's even been named as a public health epidemic in certain places, which is so ironic because we have more tools for connection than ever before. Right now, you can FaceTime somebody on the other side of the world. Before you even have eaten your breakfast, you could scroll through the lives of hundreds of different people. And so why is it that so many of us feel so disconnected and actually lonely? You know, it made me think back to something I read probably now about 5 years ago from a guy named Eric Jacobson in this book called 3 Pieces of Glass, where he argues that there are three technological innovations, 3 pieces of glass that have completely changed the way that we relate to one another as people, that have, in a sense, retrained us. And those 3 pieces of glass are the windshield, the TV, and the smartphone. Now, first of all, the windshield, the automobile didn't just give us mobility, it actually reconfigured the entire way that we live our lives. Where instead, even in terms of the architecture, instead of what historically people invested a lot in front porches, that could be communal spaces, barely any houses now are built with front porches. Instead, we have beautiful garages. We drive everywhere instead of walking. We pass through spaces, but we rarely inhabit them. We see people through windshields, but we rarely share sidewalks with them. And so the car gave us freedom at the expense of proximity. Second piece of glass is the television screen that changed how we relate to people around us. And so now through a glowing rectangle, we get to know people. We get to know personalities and celebrities and characters, and we follow their lives as if they are actually our friends. But of course, these are friends that make no demands on us. There's no awkwardness, there's no obligation, there's no cost. And over time, we start to like that. Because people, real people, are messy. Not you, but people maybe who aren't here today. Not us, of course. Real people need things from you. Real people annoy you. Real people hurt you. They let you down. They require patience and forgiveness, but our TV friends never do. And then there's the smartphone screen, which promises constant contact and connection, and yet it weakens your presence, where you are physically having dinner with one person while texting another person who's not in that room. My wise 10-year-old daughter caught me the other day. I was sitting with her, and then I started texting somebody who wasn't in the room, and she called me out on it, and she was completely right, because I was physically present, I was physically there, but I wasn't really there. And so what all of this does is it bends us inward. It creates a malformative effect in our lives. One author, Marshall McLuhan, famously once said that the medium is the message. And so our technology doesn't just deliver content to us, it actually shapes us. It forms us in a certain way. But here's the question we have to ask. Is this just about technology? Is this just maybe how life works now? Is this the price of modernity? Or is something deeper broken than just our relationship to technology? Are there actually more layers that we need to look at? Well, here's the good news. We believe that God has something so much better for us than that kind of disconnection. And so today is our final week. We've been in this series for a little bit now called Real Life, Real Jesus. And we've been looking at how Jesus meets us in the messy parts of our lives and our stories. And we've looked over these past weeks, we've talked about Jesus and shame. We've talked about Jesus and burnout. We've looked at Jesus and the topic of spiritual evil and anxiety. And just this past week, grief. This is hard stuff. It's real stuff. It's messy stuff. And so today, in our final week in this series, we want to turn to one last topic, which is we want to look at Jesus' heart for us when we face disconnection and loneliness. And to do this, we're going to look at really an incredible encounter that one woman has with Jesus, someone who is surrounded by a crowd, who's surrounded by people, and yet utterly alone. And we're going to watch what happens when desperate loneliness crashes into the only person in the universe who can actually do something about it. And so we're going to walk through this passage, and we're going to find three movements in the passage here, in this encounter, that show us the way out of isolation toward real connection. And so we're going to talk about the ache, the reach, and the name. First of all, the ache. Pick up in the passage, it says that a large crowd followed and pressed around him, Jesus. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Now, here's what's happening. Jesus is on his way to actually do something else, which is to heal the daughter of this prominent leader named Jairus, very time sensitive. It is critical that he gets there quickly, urgent mission. And as Jesus is moving his way toward Jairus's home, he's through the streets, there's this massive crowd of people that gathers around him. And so it's hard for him to go anywhere. I kind of, when I was reading this, I was thinking about if you've ever tried to go in December around Christmas to Rockefeller Center to see the tree. There is first of all, I don't recommend it because there's a massive humanity. I was almost stampeded a few years ago trying to go there. But you know how that feels. You can't really go anywhere that fast. And so there's this scene, hundreds of people, but now it's as if in the passage, the camera moves from the hundreds of people to this one woman. And there's this key detail there that says that she has been bleeding for 12 years. Now, we don't know exactly what's happening here. It's likely a uterine condition of some kind. Now, that alone would have been so hard to bear over a decade of physical pain and weakness. But in that culture, there are actually layers of suffering related to her physical condition that we can't even clearly see in this passage, and that in our culture we can't immediately grasp. Under Levitical law, Leviticus 15, a woman with a flow of blood in that time and culture was considered ceremonially unclean. Now, what does that translate to? What does that actually mean for us? It means that she had been cut off from normal life for at least 12 years. The historian Josephus tells us that the temple would have been closed to a woman in her state. And so for her, the temple has been closed for 12 years, no worship, no community gatherings, no festivals, no Passover, no Sabbath meals with family and neighbors, but it actually gets even worse than that. It means every person that she would have touched would in turn become ceremonially unclean. Every dish she ate from, every chair she sat upon, which means no physical contact of any kind, no hugs, no embrace. Maybe she couldn't even hold her mother's hand. She couldn't have a friend over for dinner. And so she was essentially like a leper in the ancient world, relationally exiled and quarantined. Mark adds this painful detail, says she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. You know, later Jewish tradition in the Talmud lists 11 cures for her condition. Some of them, I was looking them up, some of them quite bizarre. She probably tried all of them. That's what it's saying. She tried everything out there. And in the process, we're given this detail that she's emptied her bank account basically to pay for her medical bills. To try to treat her condition, she has spent every last bit of money that she has. And the cruel irony, it says that instead of getting better, she grew worse. Now, the word in Greek that Mark uses here to describe her suffering is this word that is also used to describe a whip or a lash, really an instrument of torment. And so that's really the picture. This woman has been through torment. Medically desperate, financially broke, socially isolated, spiritually cut off, emotionally wounded for 12 years. Now, here's what we need to understand, though, about this story. This story is not just about one woman's unique tragedy. It's actually a vivid picture of something that's deeply theological, and it's a story about how we are made and about what happens when that design gets fractured. Now, here's what I mean. Go back to the very beginning of the Bible. Go back to Genesis chapter 1. And God says, let us make mankind in our likeness. Let us, notice that. God exists as three persons in one, Father, Son, and Spirit, in this eternal, joyful, loving relationship. And so when God made you, he made you for the same thing. He made you for relationship, and he made you for connection, and he made you for communion. And then there's this remarkable statement in Genesis 2 where God says, it is not good for man to be alone. Now that's stunning when you think about that, because everything else in creation, God says it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. But aloneness, that's the first thing in the Bible that God said is not good. Why? Because we're made in the image of a relational God. Richard Plass and James Cofield put it this way in their book, The Relational Soul. What does loneliness tell us about ourselves? Be it chronic or acute, slight or significant, loneliness is proof of our relational design. At the core of our being is the truth that we are designed for and defined by our relationships. We were born with a relentless longing to participate in the lives of others. Fundamentally, we are relational souls. We cannot not be relational. We cannot not be relational. In other words, it's not optional. It's not a personality trait. It's not something that only extroverts need. It's how you were made. It's at the core of your being, which means that the ache of connection that we sometimes feel as human beings isn't weakness. It's not neediness. It's not something you have to hide or be embarrassed about. It's actually a clue as to your design. It's telling you the truth. That feeling of loneliness is telling you the truth about who you are. But now, Genesis 1, 2, now get to 3. So much can be understood through Genesis chapters 1 through 3, it turns out. Genesis 3, sin enters our world. And here's the thing. Sin, it's interesting, sin doesn't create the longing for connection. It disrupts it. The longing is good. It happens before the fall in Genesis 3. Sin frustrates it. Sin makes it sort of impossible. The state of sin in our world makes it impossible to fulfill it. And so relationship now, for the first time ever in Genesis 3, fractures in 3 dimensions. It fractions vertically. The relationship between humanity and God is fractured. The relationship between humans is fractured. And even our relationship to ourselves and how we understand, how we see ourselves is fractured too. As it keeps going in Genesis, Cain becomes a, quote, restless wanderer. At the Tower of Babel, it ends in fragmentation and scattering. Over and over and over, sin isolates us. And so here's the key insight here. Your loneliness isn't evidence that something's wrong with you. It's evidence that something's right about you. Here's what I mean. You're feeling exactly what you should feel when communion is broken. The ache is telling you something. The problem is that the state of sin has made it very, very difficult for that ache to be satisfied in the way that God actually intended to be satisfied. Creation, in other words, creation itself tells us that loneliness is not a flaw or a bug. It's actually more like an alarm system. It's telling you something. Modern neuroscience even tells us that when you perceive social isolation, that your body reacts as if there's a threat. I was reading about, this is decades ago, but the psychologist John Bowlby, who pioneered what became known as modern attachment theory. And the way he did this, one of the ways he did this, was by studying orphaned children in post-war Europe. And what he found was really awful. He found that children, even if they had been fed and clothed and sheltered, but not held, not seen, not conversed with, not loved, those children failed to thrive. Some of them even died. Why? Because connection is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Attachment is not just psychological, it's even physiological, it's spiritual, it's baked into the fabric of who we are. But here's what's tricky when we talk about disconnection, when we talk about something like loneliness. Disconnection doesn't just have one face. There's no template, there's no formula for what it looks like. It doesn't discriminate by age or by stage of life or by personality type or by level of success in your life. Look, you could be a 90-year-old person in a retirement home, and that's one way to feel lonely. You could feel utterly alone and utterly invisible in that retirement home. You could be a 20-something right out of college, and you miss the community, the baked-in community that you had on the campus, and now you're out in the quote-unquote real world, and it is way harder, you're finding, to make friends out in the world as an adult than anyone had ever warned you about. And so you feel lonely, you feel stuck. You could be a professional, a successful professional who's admired and yet unseen, because you never know if somebody wants to know you or if they want something from you. And so you've become very, very good at being useful, but you're not sure anybody actually sees you. Or maybe you're a young mom, and you are around humans literally all day long. Small, loud, and needy little humans. You too can feel lonely. There are times when you want a conversation beyond Bluey. Now, you love your kids, but some days, if you're feeling completely honest, if you're being honest, some days you feel like you're disappearing into the role of parent and nobody sees you anymore. Single, divorced, married, you can be lonely in any state. Some people even feel lonely because they feel different. You know, I think of, maybe you moved to this country from a different country, and maybe there's an accent that you feel self-conscious about, and maybe you even feel like an outsider because of that. Or maybe because of your background or your story or your ethnicity. It doesn't quite fit the culture and the story around you, and so you try your best to fit in and to belong. You try your best and you put on a smile, but you still feel deep down that you're watching from the edges. Or maybe you're sitting here even right now, and the irony of being around many people and yet feeling completely alone, even in a crowd of people, even sitting next to someone. See, sometimes there's this ache in your chest that won't go away, and you wonder if anybody notices and if anybody cares. You see, loneliness isn't fundamentally about being alone. It's about feeling unknown. And just to point out, loneliness is not the same thing as the spiritual practice of solitude, because solitude is chosen and it's formative. Loneliness is unchosen and it's corrosive to your soul. And yet, our culture scrambles to figure out a way out of loneliness. And so culture tends to treat loneliness as a mere social problem that you can fix by throwing more activity at it. But underneath all of that, I think the reason why it's so, it often doesn't work, just being around more people, is because loneliness is more than a social problem. It is actually deeper than that. It's a spiritual wound that no amount of networking or happy hours or romantic encounters will ever cure. And yet, in a place like this, in a place like Fairfield County, Westchester County, man, we've become extremely good at hiding the ache that we actually feel. Why? Because we've got full calendars. I'm around people all the time. How could I be disconnected? See, many of us in a place like this have great social skills, but underdeveloped relational skills, and they're not the same thing. Now, we know our way around a cocktail party. Don't get me wrong. Now, we know the polite laugh. We know the, hey, we should grab coffee sometime, when both parties know full well you're never getting together. I mean, we can talk, we know small talk. We can talk about our vacation and the lacrosse tournament and, that new restaurant that opened downtown recently. Delicious, by the way. When was the last time somebody actually knew you, though? Not the curated version, not the photoshopped version of your life. When's the last time someone deeply knew you? Because you can have an impressive career and a beautiful home and an accomplished family. You can have a life that looks completely perfect to an onlooker and yet feel completely invisible in your own existence. Many of us are incredibly skilled at appearing connected while remaining alone. It's the bleeding that no one sees. That's the woman in this passage. Now, her story happens to be very vivid and dramatic, but it's really a window into the human condition. For 12 years, she's lived this way, and she's really experiencing what we all, as human beings, experience at different levels and doses and in different ways, the ache of disconnection. But 12 years is a long time. Some of you know what 12 years feels like in some part in your own life. That's a long time to keep hoping. That's a long time to be in pain. That's a long time to feel invisible. And maybe that's you, and maybe you're exhausted. But I want to tell you something today. Jesus sees you even when it feels like nobody else does. The woman nobody else saw, Jesus sees her and he sees you. But here's a question. What do you do with that ache once you finally admit it? Once you realize that feeling of disconnection, that void, and the sense, maybe that gnawing sense of loneliness isn't going away on its own, what do we do with that? Well, that's where the story turns. We move to the reach. It says that when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Something shifts here. This woman, she hears about Jesus, and that creates hope, and hope creates movement. Now, she doesn't make an appointment to get together with Jesus. She doesn't wait for an invitation. She doesn't wait for a more convenient time when there are fewer people around. She goes right into the crowd. She pushes through the crowd, and in doing that, she actually is risking pretty much everything. She's risking public humiliation. She's risking the idea of breaking religious law. This is high risk. Every person that she bumps into physically there in the crowd has the risk of becoming ceremonially unclean, like her. And so put yourself in her emotions. What do you think she's thinking as she's going through that crowd? Maybe she's like, man, what if someone recognizes me? I have to hide my face because what if somebody recognizes me? What if they find out that I'm unclean? Or what if this whole thing doesn't work and I've just wasted a lot of time and I've humiliated myself to get nothing out of it? But she pushes anyway. Why? Because look at her reasoning in verse 28. It says, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. There's some level of faith there that she's exhibiting. Now, we don't know much about her faith. It's probably imperfect. It's probably even mixed with superstition in the other way, in some way. And the reason I say that is because in the ancient world, we have accounts from Alexander the Great being mobbed by crowds of people to touch him so that they could receive his power and his aura. Maybe she believed something similar about Jesus. Now, we don't know how much she knows about Jesus. We don't know what her level of theology, her doctrine is. And yet her faith, as imperfect as it is, maybe even as confused as it is aimed in the right direction. And so this brings us to one of the most important truths about the Christian faith, which is, as it's been said before, the thing that saves you is not the quality of your faith, but the object of your faith. Think about it this way. Let's say you're high up on a burning building, and there are two ropes side by side that are hanging off the roof. One of the ropes is thin and it's frayed, and the other rope is thick and strong, and there's a sense that that rope will absolutely hold you. Now, here's the thing. You can have tremendous faith and unshakable confidence in the weak rope, but when you grab it and jump, the strong faith in a weak object will not save you. On the other hand, you can have weak, trembling, timid, uncertain faith in the strong rope, and I don't know if this is gonna work, but if you grab it anyway, your weak faith in a strong object will save you. See, what matters is not the strength of your faith, it's the reliability of what you're trusting in. Now, attachment theory would tell you that healing begins where a trustworthy presence is consistently near. The gospel says that that presence actually has a name. And so here's why this is so key for us. The woman is showing us a posture of how to live your life, not just making a one-time desperate grab, but this is what it looks like to apprentice yourself to Jesus, where you stop trusting in your own resources and you start depending on his. See, faith is simply an empty hand reaching out to receive the gift. And this is such good news for any of us who struggle with doubt, or who struggle with, and we're like, man, my faith is weak, or I wonder if I believe enough. I wonder if I have enough faith. The gospel doesn't say, hey, work up enough faith and then God will accept you. No, this woman's faith might be actually quite small. It's confused maybe. Maybe it's even mixed with sort of superstitious or magical thinking, but it's aimed at Jesus, and that's enough. Here's the thing that's so interesting to me, though, is that it says that there's a whole crowd of people there. A whole crowd of people were pressed against Jesus. Potentially hundreds of people had touched Jesus. But there's something different here. She reaches out in this sort of desperate, trembling faith. And so the question that we have to ask is it then possible to be in close proximity to Jesus and yet never really touch him in faith? I think it's not only possible, I think it's one of the most common spiritual conditions in our lives. And at the same time, think about how kind Jesus is here. Because we know, it says in the passage, that she's tried everything before this moment. Which means, quite literally, she has come to Jesus as her last resort. Here's what you need to know today. Even if you come to Jesus as a last resort, he still wants to welcome you in. Jesus doesn't say to the woman, he doesn't rebuke her and say, hey, why weren't you here earlier? Why am I your last resort? Why wasn't I your first resort? He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, hey, why did you spend all your money and waste all that time? Why didn't you show up here first? No, the very fact that you come to Jesus, even if it's late, even if it's shaky and unsure, even if it's your last option, Jesus will not turn away a desperate reach. Now, this doesn't mean that we always get the healing that we want. It doesn't mean we always get the breakthrough or the timing that we want. After all, surely there were others in the crowd who didn't receive healing that day. But Jesus does want to meet us in that desperate place. He meets you where you are, not where you should be, not where you pretend to be, where you actually are. And so if you're here today or you're listening to these words today, and if you've tried everything else and the only reason they are even here is that nothing else worked and that this is your last resort, guess what? You're in exactly the right place because Jesus specializes in last resorts. And at the same time, reaching for Jesus does sometimes mean we have to reach through and push through some obstacles to get there. Because there are a lot of things that keep us stuck in the crowd. Pride keeps you stuck in the crowd. Nah, I'm too good for this. I can handle it myself. You're stuck in the crowd. Fear, I don't want to be seen as weak. Maybe betrayal keeps you in the crowd where you've been burned before, and so you built up walls, but those walls are keeping you from the very connection that you're dying for. I know some of you have been hurt, really hurt by people you trusted, people in churches, people who are professing followers of Jesus, by people who are supposed to be safe. And now someone's telling you to reach again, to risk again, to be vulnerable again. And I get it, I do. I'm not saying be reckless. I'm not saying be naive. But I'm asking you to consider, what if Jesus is not like the people who hurt you? What if he's the one safe place that you've actually been looking for? And so what does it look like to reach for Jesus? Maybe it's as simple this morning as just praying, Jesus, I'm desperate and I've tried everything else. Maybe it's admitting to one person this week that, look, I'm at the end of myself here. I'm not okay and I need help. Maybe a step of reaching out is simply that the fact that you're here today, or that you're watching online, or you're watching in this room and you're participating here. Maybe that is your step of faith. Maybe that is reaching for you, and he sees that. But all of this leads us to one final movement in the passage, and that is the name. So she's touched the hem of Jesus' garment. And then it says this, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Done. Healed. Now, if you were in that situation, what would you be tempted to do? I'll tell you what I'd be tempted to do in the moment, is to quietly slip out of the crowd. All right, I got what I needed. Wow, this is amazing. I'm healed. And now I started anonymous, and I get to end anonymous, and I'm peacing out. No one has to know what happened. No awkward explanations, no weird interactions, just a healing, get your healing, and make a quiet exit. Jesus does not let her do that, though. It says this, at once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? Notice healing costs Jesus something. Power went out from him. Something of his life, something of his own energy flows to make her whole. Now, under the law, uncleanness spreads by touch, but here, holiness and healing spreads by touch instead. Her shame that should have infected him doesn't do anything to him in a sense. His purity actually restores her. That is the gospel in miniature. That on the cross, that Jesus would take our uncleanness so that we could receive his wholeness. That Jesus would be cut off so that we could be brought in. That Jesus would bleed so that our bleeding could stop. That he would die alone so that we could find family and connection. But in this moment, as this is all happening live, when Jesus says, hey, who touched me? His disciples basically like mock him in the moment. They say, you see the people crowding against you? Yet you ask, who touched me? Like, Jesus, literally everybody is touching you. There's like 1,000 people here. What do you mean, who touched me? The question seems absurd, but Jesus doesn't move on. He actually just waits. And then it says that this happened as he's waiting. Who touched me? And it says this, then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. She told him the whole truth. She told him the story. We don't know exactly what was said, but she likely told him the story of her life and her pain and her past and how alone she had felt. But my question, as I read this passage, one of the questions that comes to me is, why did Jesus do it in this public way? Like, why doesn't Jesus just let her, she's already been through a lot. Why doesn't Jesus just let her slip away anonymously? Here's why. Healing without relationship is incomplete. Jesus doesn't just want to fix her medical problem. He wants to restore her to community. Her problem, yes, it's physical, but it's not ultimately physical. It's relational. There's a deeper level. Yes, she has a very real medical condition, but the deeper wound was 12 years of isolation and 12 years cut off from community and cut off from friends and from worship and from human touch, from belonging. And so if Jesus just settles at healing her body and then he lets her disappear back into the crowd, she's going to go home healed but still alone. Still invisible, still outside. Now she'll have her health back, but she won't have her life back. Jesus will not let her settle for that. And so Jesus publicly, and yes, it's a vulnerable moment, and no doubt it took a lot of courage, but publicly he intentionally draws her out of anonymity so that she can leave knowing that she's known. And so he looks at this woman. Now, something happens that's really, for me, the most moving part in this whole passage. Jesus looks at this woman who's just pressed through the crowd, who's reached out, who's been beaten down by life, who's been exposed, who's been vulnerable, who's been through really a terrible existence. And he says to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." One word that changes everything. Daughter. This is the only time in the scripture where Jesus calls somebody by this name. It's the only time. I wonder if she's ever heard this before. I wonder if she had ever belonged to someone before. But now the Son of God looks upon her and says, "You are actually mine." He doesn't call her a patient, a client, a problem, an object of pity, daughter. And in that word, she goes from being invisible to being seen. He's dignifying her. He's honoring her. That word, daughter, it has warmth. It has tenderness. It's not clinical. I mean, yes, she came for a cure, but she's leaving with a father. And ultimately, we see the heart of Jesus for every one of us. He says at the end of this, he says, "Go in peace." Now, it's that word shalom, that means wholeness. It's restoration on every level. Go in peace doesn't mean, hey, feel calm emotions and leave. That's not what go in peace means. He's saying, my daughter, your whole life is being restored to you. You're not alone anymore. You are not cut off. I'm not just curing the bleeding. I'm ending your isolation. I'm restoring you. I'm restoring your humanity to you. One of the most beautiful and powerful little phrases I was thinking about this week related to this scripture, and it's out of Psalm 68, and it's this beautiful little phrase that God sets the lonely in families. That's what Jesus is doing here. That's what Jesus wants to do for every single one of us. The claim of Christianity is that this moment, this woman hearing Jesus call her daughter, that this is actually a preview of where this whole thing is going. It's a preview of where history itself is going. Fast forward to the very end of the Bible in Revelation 21, it says, "I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God.'" In other words, the Bible ends with God dwelling with his people. No more isolation, no more separation, no more disconnection, no more hiding. God himself comes to be and dwell among us. The ache is gone, every fracture healed. And so here's what Jesus is saying to this woman. The future has actually broken into the present right now, right here. And so when Jesus calls her daughter, he's giving her a taste of the new creation. When he says, "Go in peace," he's giving her a preview for the fullness of shalom that will one day come. An honest question, though, that I have as I wrestle with this passage, it's a question for me, and it's a question for you. How desperate are we? Like, how willing are we to actually reach? Truth is, you can be in proximity to Jesus your whole life and never really touch him. You can know about him without knowing him. You can attend church, you can understand doctrine, you can, recite things, you can articulate the gospel and still keep Jesus at arm's length. You can be religious without being restored. Do we actually want him? See, the real Jesus wants to speak to the real parts of our lives. Here's where you need to understand: the antidote to loneliness is not just being around more people. The antidote to loneliness is not that Jesus is already reaching out towards you. And so this is what we want to do right now. I want to invite you to stand. And we're gonna pray together. Jesus, we thank you that you're here with us right now by your Holy Spirit. Lord, that you bring comfort to our lives. Lord, that you place the lonely in families. Some of us maybe need to reach out for the very first time today. Maybe you've been in proximity with Jesus. Maybe you've been around church. Maybe you grew up around church and then you kind of went off to do your own thing. Maybe you've never actually reached out in faith to Jesus. Maybe today is the day. Some of us reached out long ago, but we've forgotten. And since that time, we've been hiding and we've been performing and managing, and you're exhausted. Maybe today is the day to stop. Maybe some of you today just need to hear your name again, that you've forgotten that you're daughter. You've forgotten that you're son. You've forgotten that you're loved. Today is the day to remember that. So whatever your need right now, wherever you're sitting, just invite you in your own heart to reach out, to say, Jesus, I need you. Lord, we need you to do what only you can do in our lives. Some of us are so disconnected and we feel so alone, and some of us are surrounded by people every day and we still feel that way. Lord, I pray that you'd bring us a healing and a wholeness at a deep soul level. Lord, we thank you that you make a place for us, that you give us a sense of belonging, that you give us a sense of purpose, a sense of family.